business, money, and banking. So if I do well in this answer, then you taught me well. If not, then I'll blame my colleague who you taught us together, bro. This is the university that made all of us, so we'll try and put that on. First of all, pre-DDEP, the average weighted interest rate was 19% on central government. When you add Dachi and Esla, who actually are special purpose vehicle, I think the panel earlier on had mentioned the issue of putting everything together. When you put that together, the weighted average interest rate was exactly 21%. So what that means is, every year, in terms of the debt stock, 21% will be paid by, in terms of the debt service. Simple. The DDEP brought it down a total amount of 203 billion Ghana cedis to 9.1%. So you're talking about 21% to 9.1%. So that's almost like we're primarily in bonds. So that means future years. So let me now put the illustration. 20 years if you were bonds, let's say 10 years for ease of comparison. Then what it means is that every 5 years, your interest payment should be equivalent to the stock of the debt you pay, right? 20% times 5 is 100. So for 10-year bond, that would mean you pay the principal 200 times, right? So now if we go down to 9.1%, what that means is in the same 5-year period will be around 45%. Then Bernard, your question was, why would we do this? And at the same time, you are going to the treasury bill market at 35%. So here you are comparing 35, 81, and 9.1. Now, there are two reasons for that. First, one of the unintended effects of the debt extraction is that Ghana's access to the capital market is frozen. It's gone. The domestic 60-70% of the entire stock, you cannot borrow from that side. So first of all, you're left with only treasury bills. Now if I ask you, when was the last time you saw Ghana financing this budget deficit? Only by treasury bills. Treasury bills are not bonds, they are bills. They are discounted instruments. So they are issued on discount, not a bond that has a fixed income. Now your question is, 91 you wanted to pay, why is it at 35%? But the answer is, that's just for a 3-month period. It's not for a 10-year period. Again, you notice that every 3 months is reset. So the available market information will reset it. The issue is all the 18 IMF programs, none of them have gone without inflation coming down. So we are very certain that the interest rate regime, what you see is temporary. That's my colleague who started studying here said. So when you put that, and all this has been captured in the framework, that can be applied. So you see this is a short term, you are comparing bills, and you must put that into that direction. These bills are not last for 10 years. Now to give you the answer, is that when you look at this on the high level, it's a micro-analysis. On the micro-analysis, what is the current debt stock weighted average interest rate, including the 35%? Remember, it's 35 and 9.1. 9.1 is on the stock of 203 billion. You mentioned 60 billion net accumulation. So add the 60 at 30% and add the 203 at 9%, weighted average, it gives you exactly 13.5%. And that when you compare to 5 consecutive years of the same weighted average, the lowest were almost like 10 years ago. So this is the answer to that question from the matter of economics and finance. That is it. So you realize that this is temporary, so you will not panic. If you are an investor, these are the numbers you look at. And I'll give you specific numbers and you can check on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a round of applause for that. So that's a good one to add meat to what he said, because supported and listening to. It seems as if the main problem in Ghana began when we went back to commercial type debts and Eurobonds. That seems to be what I'm taking. Can we all agree on that before we move forward? Why is it my fault?
Again, I'll make reference to evidence. I think I heard, as I was sitting at the back, I was hearing the conversation here. I'm sure it was you. You said in the 70s we had something similar like this. Yeah, which was the year. I'm sure those who were alive then It's a similar crisis, right? Did we have commercial loan? Yeah, that was 70s. Fast forward in 2001, when we went on HIPIC, did we have commercial loans? In fact, now let me explain that. You notice that when you look at the debt numbers that he showed, go back to 2000, you'll see that multilateral and bilateral together was 94% of the entire debt stock. The entire debt stock, 94%. There was no Eurobond. Eurobond was issued on the 4th of October 2007 for the first time. There was no export credit commercial arm of the donor entity. They came around 2009.
But you admit that solving multilateral commercial debt problem are not the same. You do the domestic first. The multilateral, bilateral guys agree to 5.1 Eurobond.
I'm not sure there's any country with the creditor profile that Ghana has in the world. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm making sense. Just want to understand ourselves. A mix who haven't doubled in the Eurobonds to the level that we have. Would you say that our complexity, sophistication makes us better off? Because I think the point is about, don't forget what he said. You don't have enough money, you are looking for money. Do you go to your village loan shark or you go to your uncle? When you go to your village loan shark, then that means you're going to use the money for something that you will get enough of.
It's an accumulation of deficit. So what you are seeing as the debt stock is accumulation of a deficit. So if I ask you, what years you have a debt stock of 100% of GDP? Bottom line. So as long as if we are doing debt restructuring and we have a budget that is, debt is a reflection of many things. And it's only a reflection of borrowing. When you have half of your stock in foreign exchange, without transaction, if the deficit is no. So this is, my issue I put across was the complexity of it. And maybe if it was any other country, they would have been in crisis decades ago. But you're right, the total debt to GDP ratio then was about 26% of GDP. Fast forward in 14, 16 years, almost around 70%, sorry. When you add a rate of 2 decades. So that is a resulting effect of many factors that has happened in the economy. The point I'm making across is that I think we've got something of strength.
I mean, the information we have currently shows that they were even late in coming to the table. So we already started spiraling downward before all of this happened. So I sit here and I'm asking myself, how do we stop this? And by the way, these donors that we talk about, there's a question around donors' contributions and how they probably support our economy and all that. As we speak, Deputy Country Lead for a British government program called the Financial and Economic Resilience in Ghana. And we've been talking to so many people. I've spoken to many people who matter in this country. And now I'm asking myself, how exactly do we tame these runaway fiscal bandits? Lack of a better word. I'm worried. Even today, I've heard the Finance Ministry or the Bank of Ghana suggested that while there's going to be an MOU between the Ministry of Finance and we just see does not have probably a mind of its own, that all they do is based on rules. I think that suggestion is quite problematic because the Bank of Ghana knows very well that they have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that they do not just bankroll anything the Ministry of Finance can say, especially when, if you look closely at the goods that they're supposed to be bankrolling, are not properly thought through at all. Value for money, they don't meet any serious criteria. Look at the Ministry of Special Development Initiative. That ministry, single-handedly, I can tell you, 30% of the problems we had economically was due to that ministry. Right? Look, there's been a savings of close to, is it $2 billion or $4 billion, right? $4 billion. Beautiful. As we speak, and I heard you yesterday with City, by the way. I'm sure that money is already committed, right? But you and I should now be careful in asking for, being on the demand side, accountability agent, basically ask ourselves, what exactly would these funds be used for? Even if they are going to be used for roads, roads must be constructed quality, right? Because if they don't do that, those roads go basically get bad. What it means is that you now need more money to go and fix those roads again. So you're constantly in a cycle, and it doesn't make sense. So I think for me,
he said, borrowing is no crime. It's what you use the money for. I think he said that.
Yes.
Right? So, let's talk about external borrowing. Most of the things you do in Ghana are in cities, but you are going to borrow in dollars. And he said that your debt can increase even without doing anything because your currency has lost value. So my question is, what kind of conversation should we begin to have around what we use the money for? What is used for? That's what the crime is. Right? Although some will say borrowing can be a crime depending on where you are borrowing from and the rates they are giving you, knowing that there's nothing you can do here that can ever pay for that sustainably. Do you see what I'm coming from? So, but you are dealing with what we use the money for. It's not special development initiatives. Is there a scenario where borrowing can be good because it will be put in things that pay for it? Do you see any scenario where?
I get that. I mean, the only scenario where borrowing definitely can lead to transformational outcomes is if there's transparency throughout that process.
Okay.
Where are you borrowing from? How much are you borrowing? How much interest are you paying? What are the transmission mechanisms? Where is the money going? That's fine. But there's another layer of conversation I think we need to have. So the current vice president held a conference he himself called the Value for Money Conference. This is when it won
Value for Money.
I was there. And I asked a critical question. Are you going to, I like this concept, what sort of projects would be subjected to that credit? And then when they build, you find ways of paying back. And the state's role would be very minimal. I think 20%, 80% outsourced to the private sector. We'll have no conversations about borrowing money, and then somebody will come and say, we are doing free SHS, we are doing, I'm not saying free SHS is bad, right? There are quality issues. We are giving money to people who are hungry at a point in time. Look at this COVID scheme that we did. We got so much money, the audit was done, only 25% of all the monies related to COVID were actually spent. The rest were shared among party people. So that combination between the, I think the value for money conversation must be had. And if Agenda 111 will be done, I want to see private sector lead it. And then when they build, government's role 30%, and then maybe 70%. By the way, while I say private sector, I don't mean chronic capitalist arrangements.
I get it. All right, so I hear you. Professor Porte, let me come to you. You did a great presentation, and I wanted you to elaborate on some of your recommendations, because when it came to the fiscal discussion, there's a big conversation about fiscal rule. Do you think we should have a debt rule as well? Because let me just go back to your recommendations. You gave about 6 recommendations on your final slide. You said capping debt or a debt ceiling. Can you elaborate? Are you talking about the overall debt as a debt to GDP ratio or amount, or what are you talking about?
Exactly. I mean, the IMF report, I refer to an IMF report that they produce each year to show how sustainable our debts are. And they cap it at 50%. So your debt divided by your GDP should be 50%. Now, there is also now an ECOWAS rule, which is about 70% or slightly higher than the IMF. So there has to be a discussion. Are we going to cap at 50% or 60%? Or at least go slightly higher? The IMF says, the medium term, we should hit 55%. What is the optimal debt level as a country? And this relates to your points about borrowing. Where should we borrow? How should we borrow? We have to borrow responsibly. Yes, it's good to borrow, but if you borrow and you cannot repay, that is irresponsible borrowing. Your debt to GDP should be such that, come what may, there's a shock or whatever, you should be able to pay. You should also borrow to invest. See, we need a private sector mindset to some extent in government business. It's not all about social, so you just borrow. when the private man is going to borrow, there is an appraisal, they do all the cost-benefit analysis. Same way, the government is going to borrow, there has to be an appraisal. I have evaluated a lot of projects, donor projects, World Bank, JICA, and they produce appraisal reports that you can find on their website. If you go to World Bank website, you can see projects they have funded, the telecom, housing, roads. There's an appraisal report, pre-appraisal.
I'm sure you said he does this.
Pre-appraisal, where
he said he does the same.
Well, let me finish.
Oh, you don't?
Within the social sector, they even come round, ask about environmental impact. People, before the project is even conceived, and then you borrow to fund. And after implementation, you evaluate the project.
Okay.
Now, if you borrow from the commercial market, you provide all this, you do this. The multilateral, bilateral donor will insist on this. What about the commercial market? Do we do all of this? So, borrowing requires responsible borrowing. Then, before there's a big one. I think the point I made earlier about the 70s, my point was that it looks like we're going back to what they started. I didn't see Ghana in the 70s had debt crisis. Developing countries as a whole had debt crisis. And the problem was that they were going to the commercial market. Petrodollar money was flowing. So they shifted from the multilateral and did more of the commercial paper. Right. So we should learn from...
My final question to the panel is this. On the premise that borrowing is not a crime, what is the best measure of debt sustainability? And is there a number we can use? And I'm saying this because you keep talking about debt GDP. But I know that when you are pushed to the wall, you do other ratios, not debt to GDP. Okay. So the question is, what is the best measure of debt sustainability? And is there a range that we can use? Because fiscal rule, they are saying 5%. So it means that we have come to an understanding that if your deficit is beyond a certain percentage, you are getting to unsustainable levels. So what's the best measure of debt sustainability? And in that measure, is there a recommended range that we can all use to give ourselves comfort? Mr. Akers.
Thank you very much. I will show you the complexity of your question. There's one trigger. The country must determine its debt carrying capacity. And there are 4 levels of that. You have either a low, medium, high, or debt distress. There's no African country since COVID that is in the low. When you are in the low, it means that your debt carrying capacity is no more than 35%. When you're in the medium, that's what Prof mentioned, that's 55%. When you're in the high, you can carry more, you take 70%. So again, even though ECOWAS we have said 70, in reality, if you have a low debt carrying capacity, which should actually be 35, legislating 70 will lead you into distress because you will not be strong. Then also determining debt sustainability as a figure. Remember when we were here, there was no one variable that measured that. And in the practice, their forecasting models, 50% of the time they fail. 50% of the time, somebody will be strong and will flip, like Uruguay. It was a financial crisis issue and manifested itself into debt. And it went into debt restructuring, not because the fiscal was off. Right? So a debt sustainability may not show that level. So again, in the DSA that you use, you have about 6 indicators. And at any point in time, you want the threshold of that. Now, a second complexity. The debt sustainability analysis designed internationally, basically there are 2. Low income and market access. Is that a low income country? Good. But we use low income to assess our debt sustainability. Why? Because you're not a market access too. Once on that side, those who call market access don't show the poverty levels that we do have. So again, there's no framework internationally agreed that satisfies countries that you call frontier. Frontier are those who have leapfrogged from low income. They are not fully emerging, so that's why they try to call it emerging, etc. So you've got a very delicate problem. Then beyond the economics, there's also a financial question. Don't forget, debt is not only economics. Debt because you're dealing with people in the financial markets. Right? There are other indicators, and I think
My colleague here mentioned one on the sovereign credit ratings. He mentioned it. There's another one. They call it the spreads that the market offers, and that is where the difficulty is, because this can go per hour, per minute, and when you have beyond 1,000 basis points, this is technical, but just your trigger of crisis comes in when the market perceives you beyond 1,000 basis points. On October 22nd, remember the date, 2022, our trigger point had reached 3,400 basis points, 3 times the threshold. It was one of the trigger moments for Moody's to downgrade us from B3 to C in January, because those that have that trigger point cannot be in an investment range. This is not economics, this is finance. So the combination of that, beyond the economic tools, you need to combine it, because this can trigger you into crisis without necessarily the economics of it. So if you watch, the laws of this country, they were very cautious. In section 16 of the PFM law, the indicators of fiscal includes debt, but it never gave a numerical rule. In the fiscal responsibility law, section 2, precisely, you see it gives debt also there. So debt has appeared in 2, but did not give a fiscal rule, because your debt carrying capacity can change. And if you notice carefully, in the debt restructuring for Zambia, a typical issue has arisen. In the midst of Zambia's restructuring, there's evidence that is showing Zambia's debt carrying capacity would increase from 35% to 55%. And that has implications. So the law also has to be precise. And the law cannot be numerical, because the difficulty of these changes. But if you read carefully in section 5 of the fiscal responsibility law, it says even if you do that, the minister should come to Parliament every 5 years to change it. So Doc is right. You need to mix this law with economics and then the finance and the realism of what you need to put across.
Thank you. Yes, wonderful. Put your hands together for the panel. I wanted to just say something. Just because I'm still here, there's also the behavioral part of attitude to risk, and also savings culture. Because I think somebody's presentation began by saying one of the reasons why we are always in deficit is that we don't even have enough savings accumulation as a country. So, are the psychologists still here? I think that again, even on the debt discussion, there's a school of thought that because, and this I'm not personalizing, because the finance ministry always has a mix. Accountants, bankers, economists, working as a team. There's a strong view, at least in the media, that there's a certain period that the leadership was very investment banker oriented. So their mindset towards risk was different from, say, a Setepe accountant background. I don't know whether these are behavioral issues that can also account for the way we approach debt. Did you understand what I'm saying? Because you just pointed at the way an economy sees it and the way a finance person sees it. Now, if somebody is working in an investment bank for 30 years, the way he sees the market will not be the same way as somebody who's taught economics at level will see the market. Do you get it? So maybe we also did some behavioral studies around how the leadership of the ministry sees risk and how that fits into the behavior. Please, am I making sense here? Because if you look at the profile, for example, when you were there, it was a very interesting thing. Dr. What's his name? I could all say, and then yourself. There was a very interesting mix of it, because one was a chartered accountant, one is a macroeconomist, one is. So maybe the team's approach to managing the economy is quite varied. Okay? And this is quite a delicate point. But from the media side, you look at the minister, his minister of state, they were both market people. Alright? They were market people. And so basically, that was the main game in town. Because that's what they understand. You may not be able to comment on this, but I think that it's a very big discussion you have to have around how those who manage the physical perceive risk, perceive the markets. Because I remember interviewing Mario one time and asking the question, says, do you want me to be lynched? Then he referred me to something that happened in Uzier's time and how that informs the way he makes policy around the valuation of currency. He's an accountant. His mindset around the economy is guided by those rules. So we also need some work around the way people see the market. Please, because he kept asking, if you are going to borrow, you have to do some work. And I know you do that work. Okay, but you don't take the final decision. So maybe beyond, but if we are going to have a discussion around our debt, we cannot leave out the behavioral part of our economic managers. It will not do justice to the topic, because this is not just a numbers issue, it's also a behavioral.
We are talking about positioning ourselves beyond aid, but I'm talking about even how do we position ourselves beyond debt. Of course, every country has a budget deficit from now on, but it's not automatic. It's not like debt is automatic. Why can't we program ourselves to have a balanced budget? Why is that not possible? We have resources in this country. We are not a poor country. We have natural resources. The vice president is out there saying that our gold reserve alone is $10 trillion. That's gold alone. So why do we always want to look to the outside? When I hear about we are preparing to go for another Euro bond, I'm thinking, why? Why should we be doing that? Internally, we have the resources here. Why are we not talking about, maximizing our returns from our natural resources? We let foreigners come here and then they take away 85%, and we take 15%. And our policymakers are telling us that, oh, this is the best that we have ever had. So if you have something that is better than previous things, it means it's good. No, it doesn't follow. So I think that we should be talking about how do we position ourselves beyond, debt, and we have resources here to tap for that to that end.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me take Joe Jackson, because he's on the next panel, so maybe he wants to give us a teaser of what will happen to us. Dennis, Joe Jackson.
Thank you very much. Like everybody else here, I see my lecturers here, so I am very careful. I was in the department. So, and I want to address this issue from a finance perspective and say that there may be several complicated parameters, ratios that we may use to calculate how much debt we are capable of taking. But of our tax, our revenue, goes to service that debt. And that is a simple enough figure for each one of us to understand. And maybe that's what we should fix in there. Because otherwise, and you see, it's debt to GDP is such a difficult to...
You get me? So if there's a woman who wants to talk, let me give her the mic. It's very important,
Thank you very much. Yes, it's getting to the catastrophic level, so it's right that we are all thinking about what to do. Yes, I think this is really, really crucial, because if we keep going round and round, and then there's been a submission on what is the most appropriate debt service ratio. So what do we do as a nation? We need to be very...
Yesterday I listened. I'm Osman from Africa Center for Energy Policy. I listened to the finance minister yesterday when he was having the briefing. He did mention that there was an arrangement with ECG to purchase fuel for power generation. And I want to ask a question related to that. The IMF themselves have actually pointed out that the energy sector, but the power sector to be specific, is a key driver of debt in Ghana. This is not borrowed debt. This is just debt accumulation from inefficiencies of management and also structural inefficiencies. From where we sit at ASEP, our analysis actually show that the value chain, within the value chain, inculcated under recoveries, which accumulated as debt as part of what...
Sorry, what did the minister say yesterday about ECG?
Yes, as part of the reforms, I can't quote him specifically, but as part of the reforms, he did mention that the fuel supply was an issue with the generation. So they had an arrangement with ECG, which I even heard ECG was speak about this some months ago, that they had to buy fuel for generation for some power plants, and due to that they couldn't actually oblige to the PURC requirement, the capital for mechanism requirement. And this is something that, I mean, some of us don't know.
So your concern is that by ECG being given that mandate to buy the fuel?
Yes, when we all know that they are under recovery every month, and which under recovery accumulates as debt.
So when you say under recovery means that they are not able to collect
exactly how much they are supposed to collect.
And they are buying the fuel in dollars.
Exactly.
And they are selling the power in cedis.
Exactly.
So that's the point.
So why are we compounding the problem for
them? They are going to, beyond their inefficiency in collecting the money,
exactly.
They are going to now be in debt in dollars.
Exactly.
For money that they can't collect in cedis.
And we are paying for it.
So that's the point you're making.
Exactly.
So in addition to his cocoa, you want us to add the power sector.
Exactly.
To bring it under the ministry.
Exactly. It's benefiting everybody here.
You have a lot of problems you want to add. So we are going to add cocoa, because you also said cocoa to the go and misbehave, and then this. So you need to expand on this. It's a good point. I'll let him comment on it.
All right.
I like your train of thought. I want to go to Echo Bloomberg. I think I want to broaden the discussion to those at the back too. Echo from Bloomberg, and then okay. Thank you, Echo. Let's hear you. Echo Moses.
Thank you for the introduction. Mr. Sam, there is a school of thought that using GDP as a measure of debt is somewhat misplaced, because we do not pay your debt with GDP, you pay with cash, and that a better matrix will be revenue to debt ratio instead of GDP to debt ratio. Is it any wonder that somebody will have 150% debt to GDP and they are still well solvent? And we have 50% quoting a day and you are buying. So which is a better, more nuanced way of handling that issue? Then, just on what my colleague said, yesterday I had a minister say something about master gas agreement. And my understanding was that GNPC was going to try and use its position as the state-owned company on the oil and gas to get some natural gas to the IPPs. So the IPPs will use that to produce power, which will be cheaper or sustainable. I don't know what that means. You were there. Can you give us some clarity on that to help the house?
So good to have journalists in the house. They bring the issues home. So, by the way, this is not a press conference for Minister of Finance. So, this is when we are a finance person, we all direct echo. This is a discussion about data sustainability, right? So, we can even do interviews with him later together, because we want to focus on what to communicate at the end, how to solve our debt problem. So, let's not convert it into a press conference for the ministry's webpage. That's not to discount your question.
So for the external, that's what we do. And also, the major program to borrow $1 billion to invest, we do an analysis, and you know that this is what I'm going to use the money to do. If we borrow to consume, then we have a big problem. And that's one of the major problems we have in Ghana. But if we sit now after this roundtable, and we say that, look, agriculture is a key sector, there will be no manufacturing sector without a proper agriculture base. If we say we want to put a bridge on the Afram place, the question now is where do we raise this money from? And if the investment is mainly local and is not foreign, we don't need to go to the international market to borrow. That's difficult, very difficult to understand why anybody would think that zero central bank financing is a sensible thing to do for developing countries. None of the developed countries now did that at the time they were developing. We can go back to economic history. Japan never did that after the Second World War. Germany never did that. The central bank is not just for monetary key partner with the Ministry of Finance to release long-term finance at a low interest rate. That means that you need to know how to manage your monetary policy, such that we can fix the major problem. If we now say they should be zero, and then we now run out to go and borrow dollars, we will be having this conference over and over again.
I think these are very the panel is not question and answer, so some of the answers are coming from here. So please take note. Some of the answers are coming, right? So of course, some of the things you asked have already been answered, so I'm not going to let you answer. So that's UDS. You've come all the way from Tamale. You can't just go like that. The mic. You have to say something. Yes, Tamale. Yes. How? This
Okro. They now come to sell. I understand some time back, some team came from Israel. And they managed to visit it up north. They were weeping. Why were they weeping? They saw the vast land that we have, and we are wasting it compared to what they are doing in Israel. So let us refocus. All this debt servicing, blah blah. It is, let's feed ourselves first. Then we can move. Thank you very
much. By way of suggestion, the point of Aka made about the central bank and the point about Greg, I'm just saying that the next round we may want to look at some real sector issues as well. I think the numbers are good, but some of those points can be useful to bring people together more. The point around productivity. So whoever is taking those, please remember that for the next quarter we will enter some real sector issues. I don't even know. Let's take Professor Sean and then we take 2 more. Then we'll wrap up the segment. Yes, we'll wrap up. We have a final one to do. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Mike, I said, every deficit finance moves directly into the debt, right? So even if we try hard to move into an era of low deficits, it is not enough. Because the Constitution also allows any government to borrow other than for financing deficits. Borrow for refinancing, borrow for on-lending to other government agencies, private sector. So, those types of borrowing, we must set an eye on them to make sure that they don't derail the process. That is why you have to set up a debt ceiling. And therefore, anybody who is doing the calibration, once you do your deficit, you have to go and find out what other borrowing areas are there which is going to derail you. Otherwise, you'll be working in futility. It is very important. But the Constitution allows it. So you cannot discount it.
Thank you. Let me come to the front, Professor Baole, then I'll end with Dr. Suo.
Bernard, I'm not an economist, but I wanted to check the extent to which unsolicited bilateral support contribute to our debt stock. And I am particularly interested in that because sometimes I hear, Parliament is considering something because some bilateral person has said they were going to give Ghana a particular type of loan, and if you hear sometimes what it was meant to be, you ask the question whether we were really interested in that before this came. And of course we know that in this space, you can get fungibility. An entity already has resources available for something. Somebody comes to say, I want to give you this, and they take that in addition. They end up wasting both, and then you end up having to increase your debt stock. The other one that I wanted to also talk about very briefly is the issue of our quote development partners and the role that they can play in managing the loans that we go for. Lots of times they are excited. Of course they say country system, especially IMF, World Bank, they will say country systems. But they know that in some cases, not all the times, the country systems are extremely politically driven. And they know that these resources that they give us will go waste. Will we have a situation, a Kenyan situation, literally, where the citizens of this country go up and say, you gave us the loans badly and didn't care, and our politicians mismanaged it, and therefore we will not pay? Because I'm worried about the extent to which they just dump the resources for us, and they keep holding us and all of us accountable for it when the politicians that got it and spent it are no longer on the scene.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Suo?
Yeah, thank you. First, on the comments of the finance ministers, I agree with my colleague over here that it doesn't matter really. In 1994, there was a publication in the Newsweek magazine where they took a survey of all finance ministers in the world. Only 34 were economists, and the analysis also showed that the non-economists were better as finance ministers than the economists. So I think that drive is not there.
Which of the
By the way, I've totally enjoyed this session. Very informative. But you said something which really caught my attention. And Dr. Ashon also said something to that effect. That debts are a reflection usually of the deficit. And that is true. But we can also have a problem with it here in this country. Because a sitting government who then knows that there is election coming up in that year brings up a program, he has majority already in parliament, manages to push through the budget, knowing carefully that it is going to create a huge deficit. Presumably he is solving a problem. But you're creating a deficit which may translate into a debt for whoever then takes over. We don't have any rules for controlling that. I'll give you an example. If to solve a power problem, you negotiate with some independent power producers, and you got them, and you sign with them a take or pay arrangement. By the time the election came and you are not there, you've really left a huge burden for whoever is taking over from you. There's no law to control that kind of thing. And it can lead to misbehavior by politicians who don't care that I may be there or may not be there. That really is something which is, I think, is worrying.
Thank you. Please put your hands together for yourselves. I'm going to ask the panelists to give their closing remarks. There's lots of questions asked, so you decide which you answer, because we have to enter the final panel in 5 minutes. So let me start with maybe Franklin, then I'll take Professor Korte, and I'll end with Mr. Akest.
Right, thank you very much. The question essentially, how do we have conversations about reviews of policies that have actually been done by the Fiscal Council? Okay, then I think the other thing I suspect we should be doing is to also win off subvented agencies from the payroll. I recall working with I was the civil society on that committee. I think one of my colleagues here, I don't know if he's still around. And we met most of the subvented agencies, FDA, Ghana State Authority, and we actually saved close to 250 million Ghana cedis at the time. There's a report that is there. So we thought that when my good friend Ken came, we continue on that. He just threw it somewhere. Anyway, so we need to do that work. It's important. Gift mix. Almost 3 or 4 years ago, about 85% of transactions did not go through gift mix. You cannot behave like that, really. And I think it is also important to finally say that, look, some of this, a little anecdote. You know, the Argentinian president has just turned their news agency into an advertising agency to generate money, right? I think we need that type of thinking. Finally, just to say that
we should turn it to an ad agency.
Yes, an ad agency. Yes, he's done that so that they don't have to take money from the state. You know, for me, the Bank of Ghana question still rings true. And like you, Prof. I did in 2015. I met the government director of the Central Bank of England, and we had conversations. I remember the parting words he gave me. He said, the day you allow your central bank to be railroaded by the Ministry of Finance, that's the end of fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin. Professor Korte.
Thank you. I think the issue about the debt ceiling is very crucial. Just like Professor Aka said, we don't have one indicator. Several of them, we have to look at our own economy. Export, we have used export GDP, we have used growth in export revenue compared to interest rates, because you're going to pay in dollars. So if your export revenue is growing by 2% or 3%, and interest rate is 10%, that tells you several indicators to really assess your debt, my friend will say carrying capacity, your ability to pay your service, your debt. And we have to borrow responsibly, borrow and invest, not to consume. We need to do all the necessary appraisals to ensure that whatever we borrow is put into productive use rather than what we should. Something we have not spoken about, I haven't touched on, tide aid. Justice mentioned sometimes bilaterals throw money as it comes with conditions. Chinese aid will come with a Chinese contractor, Chinese consultant, equipment, etc. So there's no capacity building within our system. And we have several of this tide aid. That's one that brings waste. There was a time I was carrying a study on tide aid. I went to ECG, and the man showed me, said, look at this warehouse. You have a lot of meters. They are not fit for purpose. Because we got them through aid. I believe there are several things we have got through tide aid which are not value for money. So let's be guided by this. And then we spoke about the real sector. If I've been conceiving this whole dialogue, what we initially planned was going to be a 2-day thing. And there were a lot of, we're going to look at the real sector, export, trade, realized it would be too tiring. So we said we're going to do a quarterly dialogue. By the way, we said dialogue, not round table. It looks like people like round table, so next time we'll have a round table. Finally, our students are here. We invited about 80 students or so. So there are some students, make it strictly by invitation.
Make it examiner.
And some are online. I must say, quite a number of them are also joining online. Thank you, students, for coming.
Let's end with Ms. Akers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll make 3 interventions because this is an amazing feedback, and also the knowledge level here is important. The first one is on the debt ceiling that Prof mentioned. And I think that is why, if you're looking from 2019 to date, you started seeing Appendix 10C that started putting a debt ceiling on external contracting of loans. This is all on the stuff about contracting of loans. So it's a very important issue you have raised. And when you go into the next one we mentioned here, is the element of now being influenced by the professor and what he said at the back there. Now these 3 variables, they start with D. And I know that Prof and myself, we did A-level, so if you get 3 Ds, then you have one step to get into a failure. Even at the time, you only take, Prof, you remember, A, B, B. So again, it is ironic that countries with a democracy like us, a very competitive democracy, they have deficits and then they have debt resulting from it. When you mention Rwanda is autocratic. So it's not surprising they have control over the macro variables. On that note, I will make a quotation because, Prof, I want to remind myself in 1991, when you taught us the Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, there's a quotation there which I still remember now, that it says, what is prudent for that of a household is never fully for that of a great kingdom. So I will leave us here with that completely reminds that and we can apply it at a big level in the sophistication of our governments like this. Thank you.
A round of applause. Sam Akers, Director Treasury Debt Management. Franklin Kujo, President Imani. Professor Bitakoti, please take your seats. Wow, what a session. I need a break. It's too much. Guys, we're going to finish hard, right? And this is the final one. This is the monetary policy panel. And I'm going to invite Professor Jepoma. She's joining us virtually. So, when you are quoting things from books, I wonder what we did here, because I don't remember all the things. Hey, Charlie. And you were bringing your computer, we did econometrics, there was a word in econometrics, heterodasticity. The economists will go to hell. Heterodasticity. We had a guy called some guy, T something. That's econometrics. I don't remember the name. Some short Fatima. Wow. Anyway, so we're going to invite to join us virtually Professor Jepoma. Jepoma, people want to go for lunch, so you have to be very wild. Professor Jepoma, are you there? Hey, is there something happening that I should know?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me, please?
I can hear you, but people are standing. I want them to sit. Please sit down so we know what's happening. This is the last one. Prof, thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes to give us a presentation, and then we do the panel. Are you ready?
Yes. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, but we can't see you. So we want to see you. Is there a video? Are you on? Okay. No, do what the sound? It's okay, give us the sound. The video is not good. Good job. We are happy with the sound. Just put up the video. Because sometimes the video affects the. But your sound is clear. Your sound is clear. So go ahead. Okay, it's coming. Go ahead. Put your hands together for Prof.
So, good afternoon to everybody. I'm very happy to be part of this panel to discuss
or we need to rationalize and offload some to the private sector. But look at government wage bill, it's huge, about 50% of it. And we have to really look at that. Once we solve the deficit problem, the living legislature and parliament will have an oversight and monitor and ensure that our debt GDP doesn't exceed, let's say 60%. We also look at some of the indicators, export revenue, growth in export revenue, because we paid our debt through our export revenue. So look at all of that, so we minimize the debt, ensure value for money, borrow to invest. Don't borrow to consume, that will not help us. Let's invest so that we'll be able to generate additional resources to repay the debt as they fall, while we also avoid tied aid. The tied aid doesn't help us. Aid tied to conditions, tied to donor contractors, tied to procurement of goods from donor country. We have to get competitive pricing so that whatever we have borrowed, we can get value for money.
Thank you very much.
Yes, because when you get these kinds of loans, God forbid if you should default, it means they have your natural resource to mortgage and take away. And when we mortgage such future earnings, for posterity, and sometimes we don't use the money judiciously, we are perpetually putting posterity resources and be able to repay. Because when you mortgage the national resource, they are taken in raw form. Whereas we need to process this, add value, and we can get more from this natural resources.
Final comment, please, you shared the experience at the port. Are you able to put more light on it?
Yeah, so with the port, as I mentioned, if we digitalize the port system and ensure that we minimize the human interface, but there's a lot of discretion. If I import poultry products, and I describe in the manifest poultry products, yet the price of poultry depends on whether it is the chest, the breast, or the thigh, or the feet. The prices are different. So then you leave it to discretion. Then whoever is valuing can then apply whatever rate. So when we minimize some of this human interface and make it more digitalized, we reduce corruption significantly at the ports. That could go a long way. If you want to clear a single vehicle now, the tons of taxes you have to pay, the different categories of taxes, is so high that it makes evasion or tax avoidance very lucrative. Because if a customs officer would ask for a bribe so he could clear it for you cheaper, you will do it. So
Excessively high taxes promote corruption. And who suffers at the end of the day? It is the government that suffers at the end of the day. So make the taxes affordable, put in systems so we can generate enough revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But don't forget that there are also inflationary pressures in the economy. And economic agents incorporate those expectations into their decision-making process, and that is sometimes cause inflation. So the inflation targeting regime that we are employing now, yes, is trying to tone down such inflation expectations. There are also times when there's too much liquidity in the system, and that itself can also cause inflation. But you see, the supply side factors that cause inflation cannot be addressed by the central bank. Those are long-term factors. If you take the classroom, you have aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So supposing supply is shifting up and causing prices to increase, it can also bring demand down to bring down the prices. In the interim, hoping that the structural changes that have to be done to get inflation from food and other sectors of the economy down is what we try to do. Don't also forget that there is a pass-through to inflation from the exchange rate. And so we've had criticisms that the interest rate is too high. What do you do? The Federal Reserve is keeping this rate higher for a longer time. If you reduce your rates, there will be capital flow reversals. The capital flow reversals itself will lead to a depreciation of the currency, which when it does, will do two things. And we started stressing that. It's going to increase your debt, and then at the same time, the depreciation of the currency will mean that price at the pumps will increase. It falls into transportation fares. It has an impact on food inflation, and then itself is a component in the basket for computation of inflation. So we've had our criticisms, but the presentations that are made before us as a committee and where the heat is coming from also comes from the demand side.
Are you able, these days the statistical service is so kind in giving us some very detailed breakdowns, even of the CPI, the basket. Do you think that's a subtle invitation to the MPC to pay closer attention to the drivers of inflation so that in using the interest rate to try and control the demand side, you don't overdo it? Because now when he releases the data, it takes time. In fact, the last time he even had a note to explain. The last time inflation came to 23%, he explained that it was a base effect. This is year-on-year inflation. He took the trouble to give a whole page on base effect. And then within that period that year-on-year had come down to 23, the monthly inflation was the highest in about 8 or 9 quarters. So maybe there's a need for more disaggregation and further drilling down so that we understand the inflation picture. But I don't know if you get my drift.
One thing you should notice is that the inflation targeting regime is a forward-looking regime. So we are not looking at inflation that's happening now. Our decisions are made on what is going to happen.
Expectation.
Precisely. And we have projections about where inflation is going to come from for the next 6 months. So when we make a decision today, it's on the basis of what is going to come. So what has happened already, even though we look at it to find out what actually has happened, we are projecting, we are looking ahead to do that. So at times, when we have information that look, in the next 3 months, there's going to be increase in inflation from the underlying factors. Now, if economic agents are falling back into their expectations, as a policy, we have to tone down the expectations to keep the interest rate high, so that those economic agents will know that the central bank is trying to curb the liquidity in the system to bring down inflation. So it is not what has been reported today by the. However, the central bank itself has a way in which it models the inflation and is able to tell what is going to happen in the future. And that is what normally informs our decisions. There is a fair amount of accurate prediction relating to the actual inflation that is measured afterwards. So we have presentations that are made to tell us where the inflation is going to come from and all of that. So normally, don't look at inflation as reported by the. We've moved beyond that as we speak. The 23.2%, we knew that sometime in the past. And that was the reason why we kept the policy rate high, because we knew that one was a base effect. Yeah. So the underlying currencies are still there. And we're expecting that in an election year, because the projection for the end of the year is 15 to 19%. we need to steer inflation to that band. If we are going to meet a billion target after 2025.
Okay.
So we take decisions on the basis of that. So not on what you see happening today.
My last question.
Recording stopped.
My last question on this. There are people who think that when you raise the interest rate, the expected effect of cooling down the economy that we usually say happens more in advanced settled economies where their interest rates are low, but our interest rate environment is very high. So what you get when you raise our rates in trying to tame inflation is that you rather crowd out private sector, make it difficult for people to borrow because there isn't even really enough money to even save. You get the point? So they say that there are assumptions in the economies that usually use these interest rates to control these monetary aggregates. Those assumptions don't exist here because most people have such low incomes. So when you raise the interest rate, what you actually do is that make it difficult for them to get access to credit from the banks because that rate that you raise gives a sense to what the banks charge. So we should take a closer look at our situation and model a hybrid solution. I know it's easier said than done, but can you comment around the unintended consequence of raising those rates and the effects it has on private sector access to credit? He lends at a higher rate to all of us, and we don't have money to do anything. And yet you say there's inflation, yet we don't have money in our pocket. So there seems to be some disconnect there.
So when you listen to what Professor Japan was saying, there's no doubt there's confidence. Yeah. So price stability and the move that you're making in terms of inflation targeting will seem to be hurting the private sector, affecting growth, and that is the objective of fiscal policy. Yeah. But the cost of inflation outweighs the carbon that you are talking about. And when we look at the data in terms of bond credit to the private sector, we don't see it having too much of a negative impact. So if banks are not lending, or if private sector is not going for loans, there might be other reasons why. And that is why if you look in the previous meeting that we came up with a dynamic currency ratio, just to make sure that the banks will begin to give out credit. So your CRR was pegged to the level of your bank loans to your deposit that you make. Because banks are financial intermediaries. And they are supposed to pick the deposit and lend. So our idea was that we saw the banks only a lot of loans, government treasury loans. So our idea was that we were going to get them to commit to give more credit. Because it was not because of the high interest rate that the credits were coming in. But then look at the cost of inflation. And look at the cost of borrowing. The cost of inflation will have its own impact on the cost of borrowing later on. Let me ask you a question. If inflation is very high, will you send your money to the bank?
No, of course not. But if they
how will the bank get money to give to the private sector?
I understand, but you see, for the past 14 months, private sector credit has shrunk. If you look at the bank
growth.
Yes.
Not the bank, the growth of private sector.
Yes, and the banking sector is not doing what it's supposed to do for us. There are no banks here, but generally speaking, credit to private sector is very low. And part of that is because of the high rates in the system. I understand what Japan is saying, but we need to find a way to wriggle our way out of it. And there doesn't seem to be any simple answer there. Maybe we can pause and take Joe Jackson's thoughts and then try and see if we can resolve it. Because the chicken and egg is saying, if you want to tame inflation, you raise rates. But there are also effects of raising the rates, which are also not beneficial to all of us. How do we resolve those tensions? Joe Jackson, you sell and buy money. So, can you help us here? Inflation is the big bad wolf. We want to tame him. But if you raise the rates as well, it makes it difficult for people to get access to money. So, what are you doing?
Okay, but thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge, like everybody else, Dr. Nikwa. So I was my head of department when I came to first year. So,
did you pass, by the way?
Oh, I graduated.
Because you said first year.
No, because as a first year student, he is a colossus.
Yeah.
Even when you see him, you feel like you come into the presence of God. Yes. But back to before I move on, I actually want to start off my comments by actually commending the central bank on one thing that may have gone past most people who are not in the financial sector. One of the problems we've had is that whatever they do, people don't lend. People don't lend. We don't lend. Even institutions, if you come to me as the Lex Finance and SME, I won't lend to you. That is not, I'm not even ashamed of saying that. It is the truth. I only lend to consumers and I only lend relatively small amounts of money. But one of the things that they did was this credit reserve ratio. And it was such an important, intervention in getting the banks to lend. Now, here I'm saying this first because I suspect that the rest of the things I'm going to say are not going to be pleasant to the central bank. So let me comment that first. Before I won't finish it. Listen, I subscribe to the school of thought, but ultimately, all inflation is monetary. That you can't have sustained high levels of inflation if there's not some excess cash chasing the small goods we have. That let's not overemphasize this issue of the supply side shocks that kicked off with COVID, etc. The real culprit was the 55 billion that was handed to government. That's the real culprit, at least in my opinion. That is the real culprit. And we are all suffering now because of those decisions that were taken then. Because there's a lack. It will even disappear out of the economy in one month. So, to the extent that they are now trying to mop up, however painful the high interest rates are, we may have to accept it because we are now paying for the sins that were committed in previous years. And there's pretty much very little we can do about it. Our present bout of inflation may have been kicked off on the supply side, but I assure you that it's been many times multiplied by our own internal sins. That is why when you look at the Francophone countries, who are all around us, who all suffered the same things we suffered, produced the same way, economies are structured the same way, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, etc., you will find that, but the very simple fact that they had an independent central bank, the long-term or medium-term effects of the inflation we all suffered has been minimized. Our pain here is that there was a time we should have taken some painful fiscal decisions, and we didn't take them. There was a time when we should have raised our hands and said that we have to go through some pain. We almost acted like there was a free lunch, and there's no free lunch anywhere. So the inflation we are facing now and the high rates, we may just have to accept it.
I wanted to press you on something.
Okay.
You said that the credit reserve ratio had improved the situation. You know, we studied bank balance sheets for the past 2 years.
Yes.
A lot of the banks, the average interest income percentage from government securities was above 60%.
Yes.
Now, basically you're saying that your income as a bank is from lending, yet most of the banks were getting money from buying government paper and not giving it to the private sector. And it's because of the unintended consequence of what Ejepoma spoke about. So I feel like the issue, two things. I'm coming. If your job is financial intermediation, to take money from people who don't have it, to give it to agri, to give it to people around, and your behavior is purely giving the government money because you are going to get good interest on it, it doesn't help the economy. And at the end of the day, the growth suffers because of the behavior.
But slow down a bit. An institution like ours, we've been decimated by the domestic debt exchange program. So from where I sit, I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to repair my balance sheet, And the fastest way to repair my balance sheet outside raising external capital, for which, by the way, because of our depreciation, I'm unable to raise external capital easily. Because what happens is that if my company was worth $100 million 2 years ago, today is worth less than 40. That's the simple over 56% depreciation in the cedi from 6 cedis to $1 to 15.4 to $1 means that my balance sheet in dollar terms has been decimated. So my ability to earn to raise capital outside is gone. Now, when you talk about now, all I want to do is make some profit so that I can shore up my reserves. Same problem. We sat here, we heard about T-bills. Right? So what do I do? Take depositors' money at 7-8%, maybe a weighted average of about 12-13%. Turn around and give it to the government. Thoroughly rational behavior by financial institutions. What this did, the reserve ratio adjustment did, was to say, if you don't lend, I will penalize you with the reserve ratio. And that's why that was such an important intervention. We're still waiting to see its effect because it just took effect last month.
So that's a good policy in reaction to what happened.
Yes.
I need to, don't forget the gentleman is on the line.
Okay.
She took us into all this trouble with the initial things she said.
I have a comment. I've heard this 5 billion account, somebody mentioned.
Yeah.
At times we need to go behind to ask questions why the central bank had to do that. Around the time that this DDP it was going on, I mean, most investors were holding government bills, even the treasury bills were worried about their bills as well. So there was an increase in the demand for a recall of most of these treasury bills. And government options were failing. So, as a central bank, when you sit down and your banks are saying, look, the options are failing, the customers want their money, we can't give it to them. What does the central bank do? The central bank needs to say, okay, we are going to give you money to give, because we don't want to run on the banks. That was going to lead to a serious crisis. So I hold on to those debt instruments so that when government revenue comes in, we can retrieve that. And that's what the central bank did. But then at the end of holding that huge debt, when it came to the domestic debt restructuring, they were successful to an extent. But when it came for us to go to the fund, for us to get a final approval, there was the need for the central bank to also take a haircut. And nobody is talking about it. The central bank had to agree to that haircut before Ghana got onto the IMF program. And so, rather than blame the central bank, we should rather commend the central bank for saving Ghana from a total collapse. Because in any case, if the banking system collapsed, the central bank, the Ghana economy crashed, the central bank was going to be blamed. So there are a lot of issues that came with losing access to the credit market, capital markets. And therefore, the central bank could only play a role.
So they were forced to solve a problem they did not create.
Precisely.
That's what you're saying.
So let us look at that way, that blame the central bank for
Fair enough.
the issue that we have.
Let me take a Japan man's comment on this dilemma and her proposed solution. The conflict between price stability and high interest rates and its effect on the real sector and all that. Do you have a solution, or you just put it out there to tease our minds, Professor Ejepoma?
Well, both. I think that, Bernard, to a large extent, the inflation targeting regime that the central bank has been practicing is working for us. If you take the period before 2007 and look at the figures for inflation, obviously we see that inflation was higher in those periods. If you look at them in the years, and then after the inflation targeting regime was introduced, we've seen some sort of relative decline in inflation. So the inflation targeting regime is actually working if we are looking at the data in that regard. Now, you look at what the mandate of a central bank is. And the mandate under the inflation targeting regime is to ensure there's price stability. Every other thing is secondary, if I'm supposed to put it that way. But that's not to say that if the central bank is also making decisions on how to maintain price stability, it shouldn't take into consideration ballooning our debt and also for itself. So I think that sometimes we have to give the central bank the benefit of the doubt. Like you rightly said, they are usually, and I want to qualify what I'm saying properly, they are usually not the problem causers, but they are called upon to come and resolve, quench the fire. So they are more like firefighters.
All right.
But yeah.
Let me ask my last question, and I will open the floor. So everybody keeps saying the central bank's job is price stability. No problem. But what price? Because interest rate is the price of credit. Exchange rate is the price of forex. So is the central bank limiting or construing its price stability mandate too narrowly? Do you get? Because price is not just the price of a shoe. Because if I go to him and I want to borrow money, the interest rate is the price I pay. That's what you thought. Right? And also, if I need dollars to do my imports, the price of the dollar is the exchange rate. So shouldn't the central bank do, as the lawyers say, all things considered? So in saying price stability, they are saying the price of goods and services, the price of credit, the price of FX, all considered. So that when they put their policy in that machine that generates the result, they are not just looking at the price of goods and services, so that they properly work on their mandate. So that's to you.
Okay, so if he wants to lend to you, he's going to look at the rate of inflation and make sure that his returns will be, in real terms, will be positive. Inflation side, the interest rate is going to going to be about the inflation. So when I bring inflation down, it should have an impact on interest rates. That's why inflation is key. Now, when inflation is high, it means that in terms of exports, we are competitive. It will have impact on our export earnings. It will have impact on the foreign reserves that we have to support the dollar. So it will have an impact. So if we don't tackle inflation, our aim to bring down interest rates and stabilize the currency is not going to work. So that is why the primary mandate of the central bank monetary policy.
Hold on there, that's true. But what that means, but inflation can also be increased by the exchange rate. So, for example, if the goods I'm using to, the raw materials I'm using to manufacture my shoes are imported from Italy, and I pay USD, nothing has happened in the Ghanaian economy, but the inflation is going high because I'm going to sell my shoe higher because I needed dollars. So, I'm just trying to say that the exchange rate mandate of the BOG, so they have to build reserves, so that they also make sure that the dollar isn't that expensive. Because in just focusing on inflation as a simple issue, without looking at the exchange rate, that inflation can actually go up because they've taken their eye off the dollar.
We don't only look at inflation. I've already told you that the exchange rate could have a pass-through to inflation. So if you look at inflation, we look at another factor that causes inflation. Stabilizing the currency. So while the primary money is for inflation, you also look at the currency. You have to get that right. The central bank issues on the forex market is meant to tone down the depreciation. But the current dispensation where you're having inflation targeted.
When the 360 million comes and the central bank takes it, in a sense, the dollar price gets.
Why? Because of speculators and the fact that, oh, the bank has money now, so they can intervene. So those
but also because if an importer needs to bring in crude, now the central bank has reserves to help him bring it. So it's not just speculative, it's also because when there's dollars in the reserves, it helps.
Apart from that, we have a gold for oil, we have a gold reserves that the central bank has been doing for the past 2 years or so. We are still doing the gold for oil. If you look at last year after January, from February to the end of the year, the currency depleted about 5 meant to cure the demand pressures that come from the BDCs.
So what are we doing? We are importing the oil through that exchange using cedis. Because you use the cedis to buy the gold, you build the reserves, you use the gold to bring in oil. So we are bringing the oil in cedis, and that was part of the reason why the cedi was stable. That is going on. But this first quarter, the reason why I see the sharp depreciation is about something that we are not talking about. Ghana is at the moment making payments of the IPP debts that we owe. And these payments are in forex. So apart from what the central bank can send out to the market to support the businesses, there's another pipeline going out through the sector debt payment. And that is also taking part of it. The central bank cannot take all these reserves and drop them into the system. That's because it has to keep. We need to build our reserves because they are buffers that give confidence to investors that the country has some buffers to rely on in case there's something. So we need to be building that. That is going on at the moment. Don't also forget that if we do not look at the underlying currents, factors that cause the deficit, we'll keep on pumping the reserves and then the city will not be stable. So the discussion...
Which is why Professor Aka says the central bank must not talk about zero financing necessarily. If it can put money into, say, agri, to make sure that it generates...
The central bank is doing that already. The development bank has been formed
directly.
The central bank.
That's indirect.
That support is going to be there. The central bank cannot be directly involved in saying, government, take away your expenditure on infrastructure. We are going to do that for you. Why do you do that? We already know the fiscal side. Expenditure because somebody is taking part of it.
Okay.
I mean, like the way we've relied on donor funding for our budget support.
All right.
So we need to, and the central bank has done that in the past. Why did he need us? So we shouldn't go back to issues that I can understand, Charles. Yes, in our environment, when the fiscal policy is very efficient, then the central bank can be doing some of these things. But when there's some sort of inefficiencies coming from that area, if the central bank does it, like the central bank did to try to preserve the treasury market by supporting the banks with money to support them, you saw what has happened. The central bank is being blamed for causing inflation.
Yeah.
So we need to be very careful about some of these.
So you're basically saying the central bank keeps its eye on all three. It doesn't it's just that the inflation is the primary.
Precisely.
So that doesn't mean that they take their eye off exchange rate or interest. It's just that inflation for them is the key matter.
Go and check the indicators when we brought inflation to single digits. Some years just before COVID. And check the indicators of exchange rates.
So is the primary indicator.
Precisely.
Wonderful. Thank you for that one. Any thoughts as we move to the audience?
Yeah, one of the things that keep worrying me where this discussion about interest rates are concerned is the fact that we talk about Ghana imports too much, and it's a big issue. It's something. It's a refrain that is being talked about over and over and over again. But yet at the same time, the numbers don't show up. The numbers tell us that we've been having trade surpluses. Well, at length of time, in fact, for the last 8 years, each year we've had a trade surplus.
What kind of surplus?
No, I'm coming. So obviously, the discussion
going to the surplus.
The discussion about our exchange rate depreciation cannot be a simple discussion of imports versus exports. It has to be a much deeper conversation on a number of things. It has to be a deeper conversation about what is happening in our capital account and the kind of transfers we're talking about. It has to be a deeper conversation in about how much of the exports we are making are being retained here, how much Ghanaians own the economy, how much economic independence we have despite our political independence. And for so long as we focus on this exports versus imports simple language.
Not to cut you, you've answered the question. Import, export is important, but the problem is you can have a surplus. But if the export earnings are not retained here, you can have a surplus on paper, but still lack dollars.
Yes.
So the second layer of the import-export question is the issue of retention of proceeds. So it's not that is not an import-export question. It is an import-export question. But beyond the import-export
question, you have to ask how much of it is being...
That's the second layer of the
and when you look at some of the numbers from IES, they're sad. You look at a country like Botswana, non-oil, they retain 51%. You go to Nigeria, oil, they retain 51%. You come to Ghana, oil retain 17%. You come to non-oil, retain 6%. So some of the issue really, and that's why, to a large extent, this issue of gold for oil and gold for reserves has been again politicized. It's actually an excellent policy, because what it does is that if that gold went out, right, only 6% will come back, and then we have to chase that 6% to go and buy gas for our IPPs. If you use CDs to buy it, at least because of the gold reserves, you're getting a full $100. So for nothing at all, that policy works. That apart from reducing the demand for dollars, it also helps retain a larger chunk of our money in this country. So this conversation about our value of the city has to now talk about the fiscal side. Unfortunately, we have to go back there and say, what is it doing to our capital account? We have to talk about retention. What is it doing to our capital account? And we could go on and on and on. But that's where the conversation is, and we should stop chasing Buta.
All right. Thank you for those points. Please be asking for the panel. I really wish we had somebody from the central bank to talk more about the gold for oil program in detail, and also what they call the optimal reserve ratio. But maybe a different level that BOG will come in, because there's been some interesting insights there. But thank you. Let's take some questions. I hope we've not gone offside, because we've been dealing with... Yes, please be the mic. Question 1. Professor Korte, question 2. Lunch is ready. We'll take it home to you. It is here. Don't worry. Let's answer questions. Dr. Aka, Professor Aka, we'll take yours. So, forget your name, forgive me. Edmond White.
Thank you. Professor, thanks for the presentation. In your presentation, you were mentioning that we have to understand the causes of inflation to be able to solve the problem. From your considered view, what are some of the major causes of inflation in this country?
Thank you. Straightforward. Who's next? Professor Aka is at the back.
Thank you very much. I think the program of monetary policies is long term. It's not about initially. If you've done an analysis to go back to 1960, all the way up to this point, you will see that our focus has been on inflation, and therefore we have lost track of something we need to look at. If you look at interest rate, it's not today. If you just take the average interest rate over the last 60 years, we are the highest in Sub-Saharan Africa compared to the rest of the world. So that's something to look at, to be concerned. What is peculiar about the Ghanaian economy? Interest rate, inflation, so that food prices can come down and for us to export. That's nothing to do with interest rate. Fiscal policy and the municipal policy have to sit down and look. That's why we had Agricultural Development Bank.
It's one of the highest in Africa.
Yes.
Our interest rates are also among the highest.
Yes.
And yet our
liquidity is also the lowest.
Which of the money supplies, M1, M2?
They don't have monetary policy. And what we are going through these challenges globally, there were price controls in these countries. Public sector workers are not being paid for 3 months. Public sector workers will be paid in Ghana every month. And we cannot compare ourselves to Togo, Benin, Burkina Faso. I mean, it's a misplaced comparison.
I know when it comes to tax to GDP, they compare us.
No.
We are not doing it. But now we can't. Sometimes they compare us, we have tax the lowest. So
we need to compare ourselves to Kenya, emerging market developing economies. Those are the types.
So the francophone zone is not good. But the 30% his point is not just francophone. He's saying that our inflation is highest in Sub-Saharan Africa over the past 60 years.
It is not the highest.
One of the highest. In fact, units and inflation is not compared across countries, but interest rates can be compared across countries. And for that, he's saying our interest rates are high. I've seen a study that shows our interest rate spreads. And apart from Brazil, we're among the highest.
But if we didn't keep the monetary policy rate up there, we have inflation. We don't have no.
I know, but you see, he's
if we didn't keep it up there,
I'm saying
he would have been worse than it is.
What I want us to do is, he's saying now that our growth of money supply is lower than the Sub-Saharan African average. So let's take out from Africa. Let's take Kenya, Uganda, let's take Botswana. Is this true? If it's true, isn't the central bank also unwilling to consider the evidence that maybe the growth in inflation is more supply side than willing to admit?
I admitted that from the beginning. The point that I'm making is...
Then why are you raising the interest rates as the solution then? Because that, you use interest rate to solve inflation that's money supply driven. So if the money supply is not the cause, why are you raising the rate?
So let me ask you. We are not doing anything about agriculture. So the supply side is pushing inflation. If I can do something on the demand side to bring the inflation down, we shouldn't do that.
If what you are doing on the demand side is going to worsen the situation,
how does it worsen the situation?
It comes out because you see,
theoretically it does.
Yes.
The data that we have on private sector credit doesn't show that it's value on the private sector. And he told you, the banks are heavily investing in government bills. They are supposed to be
that's coming out.
If they are carried out to be called by government, why are you letting me?
Government is left and right.
What we can do as a central bank, I'm speaking for the central bank on monetary policy. No. So you see, the issue that we have, the issue that we are talking about government. Government goes on the market to sell its bills. At times we confuse treasury bills with Bank of Ghana bills.
Yes.
We use Bank of Ghana bills for monetary policy. Central treasury use it to meet its financing needs.
Yes.
Now, Bernard, if the banks are heavily investing in government bills,
yes,
I can only use other tools to get them to begin to lend to the private sector. But the problem is that the private sector, the NPLs are increasing because they lend money and the people cannot pay.
But the rates are too high.
It's not the rate.
The rates are.
It is not the rate. Go and check the data. It's not the rate. We make noise about the rate. Better.
No, it's not noise.
No.
The rates are very high.
No. The rates are. The lending rate is 31%, which is 15%. But the point I'm making is that if inflation is 23%,
my inflation is 23, yes, and your lending rate is 30.
The banks put their. That's why I'm asking that. Would you put your money in a deposit if inflation is high?
Yeah, but that's just one question.
No. So when you answer, you see, they mobilize the money to lend. If we don't bring down inflation, and the only way we can bring down inflation is to use our interest rate monetary policy, to give our indication that
we are asking them on this. So I'm just saying that not to see his point is that your tool is interest rate. You are using it.
Yes.
But he's saying that the central bank should consider the evidence that maybe a lot more of the inflation is supply side.
Yeah,
so if that is the case, if you keep raising interest rate alone, you are rather going to reap the negative effect because the cost of the inflation is not monetary, based on what he's saying, if this is to be believed. So why do you keep raising the rate when the cost is not monetary? That's the point he's making, which I want you to address.
Our rates hasn't been raised in a long time, even though we've kept it high for a longer time. Yeah. Because we are looking also at what is happening out of Ghana. And like I said to you, it will lead to capital flow results when the Fed and all others are keeping their rate high. We need to maintain the rate high to stop the capital flow results. So it is not only about the price, but actually, because it feeds into inflation as well. That is one thing that we should note. It's concerned about the interest rates and carrying out the private sector. What I'm saying is that the evidence shows that the banks are rather using the money to buy government bills. For us, it's a problem. How can we fund them to give loans to them? That is why we changed the CRR and made it dynamic. If we learn about 50%, maintain 50%. Right. If you go believe it, you are going to maintain higher CRR. Yeah. Just to make sure that if they are not prepared to take loan the money, we will hold on to the money. Right. That is a move that we are trying to do to encourage them to give out loans. But the macroeconomic environment
and the lack of confidence that businesses have in the government is part of the reason why they are not going for loans. 1. 2. The banks themselves are carrying high NPLs. And the NPLs are coming from the fact that the macroeconomic environment over the last years has been a challenge. And most of these firms that go for the money are not able to pay. So the banks themselves are reluctant to give out the money. Because like I said to you, you can do no buy a government goes and sit back and enjoy interest income. So the conversation that goes on is not just about the central bank. We can only regulate. We can only try as much as possible to get the banks to do the right thing. But if central government is borrowing, it's selling treasury bills, then what can the central bank do about it? That is why there is the need for a coordination of fiscal and monetary policies to solve Ghana's problems, to maintain the macroeconomic stability that we want.
Wonderful.
And if you are going to go around this,
no, so we're happy. I guess there's a question for the House to think about. So, what's the best relationship between the central bank and the fiscal authorities? Is that a partnership? Because the relationship. I think somebody, Professor Cote said that, or who was it? Franklin, that somebody said the day the central bank becomes subservient to the Ministry of Finance, that's the end of your monetary policy. So, I think one of the questions for all of us here is what's the best way we must relate? Maybe like two hands of the same human being or something, whether they are at par, because the central bank doesn't even talk that much, right? You notice that Ministry of Finance will give you spokespersons, deputy ministers who are politicians. A lot of the central bank doesn't even have a voice in public discourse, and when Parliament criticizes them, it's not easy for them to come out and respond. So now they're even getting a PR and that kind of thing. So maybe the way the central bank is structured hampers it from being effective, which is not necessarily its causing. Right? Because in our politics, you appoint a deputy minister because maybe he's from your ruling party. By a central bank person is probably a banker who doesn't want to go out and do the rough and tumble of politics. So that's all part of the discussion, which maybe, again, our next round must think about how do we get the central bank to have more power or more say, whatever. But anyway, let's take Professor Cote and let's take Leslie, and then hopefully you close us still. You will close us with your last comment.
We did enjoy the banter, the money supply, but I think inflation is not just monetary phenomenon. The supply side matters. But it doesn't mean that the money supply issue should be ignored. Okay, that's for sure. So that's why the fiscal authorities, Ministry of Finance, they also have to do what it takes. Whilst that coordination should happen. Whilst they are fighting it from the demand side as much as possible, finance is also addressing the issue so that together we're able to address the inflation problem. One puzzle I have, or challenge I have with the central bank is inability to address the black market problem, the informal forest issue. I mean, sometimes it's like they dictate the price on the market. That's where trading takes place. So you will hear, that's where the speculation and all these things are happening. And I don't know whether the central bank hasn't got a mandate or cannot bite. And we allow the informal sector to thrive. These days, you can make a phone call and then they'll bring the forest on a gather. You sit in office.
Yes.
Well, I've done it before. I needed money and so we took it to the bank to make sure it's genuine money. So you see, if we don't address this problem, we'll always have an escape with volatility. In most African countries, to exchange money, you need your passport to meet. But otherwise you can walk to any corner and change. You have become like Zimbabwe where they buy bread with dollar. I think we ought to do it, otherwise we'll get to that point.
So Leslie will take the final question, then those are the matter.
Okay, thank you, Bella. I mean, the central bank often gets pilloried over the way it conducts monetary policy. I am more sympathetic to the views of the central bank on this matter, and therefore I am more sympathetic to the views expressed by Able. You see, if you have rising inflation, interest rates will go up. It doesn't matter whether the central bank adjusts its policy rate. Consider this evidence. When the interest rate, prior to the adoption of inflation targeting, was not the main instrument of monetary policy,
interest rates were higher than in the period when interest rate is the main issue of monetary policy. So high inflation naturally will move with high interest rates. It doesn't, the banks don't need to see the signal from the central bank before they decide that their rates have to go up when inflation is going up. The other thing Ibu said, which indeed is confirmed by the evidence I've seen, is that the crowding out of the private sector has been driven by fiscal policy. In fact, you find in the data that as of 2015, the banking sector's exposure to government was about 70% of its exposure to the private sector. Now, on the eve of the crisis, by the end of 2021, that had reversed. The banking sector's exposure to government was 1.7 times its exposure to the private sector. Before the crisis, before the interest rates started going up, then we had DDEP, and the value of their claims on government dropped drastically. And then the ratio reduced from 1.7 to 1.2. So the crowding out indeed has been driven by fiscal policy is the devil. Again, if you look at the proximate cause of the exchange rate collapse, we had had a period when we had borrowed too many of the Eurobonds in a very short period. Right? Now, as we were taking on these loans, we were creating corresponding foreign debt service liabilities. So every year, a significant volume of foreign exchange had to go out. In fact, by the time we entered the crisis, we needed more than $1 billion per annum to service the Eurobond debts. We're running trade surpluses, but once you include the debt service flows, which are in the current account, the trade surpluses disappear. They turn into deficit. So we eventually got into a pattern where, because we were not generating non-debt creating capital inflows to offset the foreign debt service outflows from the current account, we had to rely on issuing more Eurobonds to finance Eurobond debt liabilities. Now, when you have that cycle, what you need is a sudden stop. So when we lost market access, the balance of payments erupted into a crisis, and then the exchange rate collapsed. Okay, so the devil is fiscal policy, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for making the closing questions. So closing comments, Prof. Ejapoma, I insist that you brought up this problem with your initial presentation. So let's take your concluding thoughts and your quick recommendation.
Before Prof comes in, on the exchange rate, right?
Yeah.
Remember that for a long time, over 2, 3, 4 years, right? Banks don't lend at fixed rate now. They lend at variable rates. If the Bank of Ghana doesn't adjust its rates at all, if inflation goes up, the bank's rate will go up. Because they're looking at real rates of return. Therefore, to adjust the nominal rate by inflation. So that's what they said. They don't have to wait for the Bank of Ghana to adjust its policy rate.
So when inflation comes down, they also adjust their rate.
That is why even in the midst of crisis, they are making profits.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they're making big profits because as the inflation rate goes up, they'll get more money by lending.
But the Bank of Ghana also then announces their profit as evidence of the robustness of the financial sector, which is a nice issue. Because they are making profit at the expense of the real sector, and yet to announce that as some achievements, then what are you doing? Because their profit is counter-cyclical. So if they are making profit, we are all suffering. Then you say that means that
the resilience was because they have suffered losses, and then soon afterwards they are reporting profits.
But
so that's the resilience that we are talking about.
When they create public debt, we spend 50 billion to save them. But it's a moral issue. Why should banks privatize their profit, and when they make losses, they can tax their money to save them?
No, the point we are making,
and they make profit when we are suffering.
The resilience we are talking about was the banking system that we had it by a debt exchange program. So you are thinking that it's going to take time for them to recover, but they recovered soon, and that's the resilience.
But if they are resilient, then they must lend to sectors that are important.
But that is why
they're not doing that, and you keep raising them for resilience because they're making profit.
Nobody's raising them for resilience.
That's what you do when you read the statement. So the banking sector shows strong growth because they did profit. But that doesn't benefit anybody. If they're not lending to agriculture and manufacturing and they're making profit and sharing the money and expatriating the dividends, how is that resilient to benefit anybody? How are you talking about? Oh, you see, if the central bank wants us to understand what it's doing, some of this is not good because see, when a lot of people don't even understand these things. So when you come out and say the banking sector showed resilience and the profit grew, and everybody else is suffering, that is not good news. And we have to make that point very clear.
We're excited that we're going to look for money to recapitalize the banks because of the issues that they have gone through. But it looks like we don't need that because some of the banks have been able to grow profit and then recapitalize themselves. So it's something that is a good sign. You see,
what did they do with that profit? They pay dividend, they repatriate the profit. Well, how does that profit help us as an economy? Because we are here trying to solve real economic problems. So a banking sector that makes profits from large spreads, most of these banks may even be owned by foreigners. That even affects your forex because it might repatriate all the profits back to wherever they are going. How does that help you? So the central bank has to be clear. See, we agree you are working with constraints, but you also have to calibrate the way you praise performance so that all of us know what we are all trying to achieve.
Yes, but you also go out and want to see that our banking system is in crisis.
But if it is in crisis, let them in crisis. That's not what we are saying. It's a lecture. I'm fighting you. Forgive me. I hope you can't recall grades because the way I'm doing. Let me keep my
Let me say a few things about Professor Conte's question about the black markets. I mean, law enforcement has to have it on the power markets. I mean, to clamp down on these illegal forex trading that is going on. It's not a central bank to do that. Right? Although the central bank has an office that is in touch with the law enforcement agencies to do that. And one thing that the central bank in itself is doing to ensure that the process that businessmen go through to acquire forex for reports. As we speak, the central bank is discussion with the Association of Bankers and GRA to see how best we can facilitate that so that they can get easy access to. But one thing that you do not know, and we do not know, an average Ghanaian. Now, if you go to some countries, it's very difficult to do business in forex. Now, businessmen will say that, look, we don't come to the bank because when I come to the bank and I take $1 million, when I import the goods, the values that are going to be used there, if I don't return any of the forex that I return, I get from the bank, it's going to be charged $1 million. I want to declare what I pay in. So I'd rather go to the private markets to get the money. When I import 1 million, I put a value of 100,000, I pay lower duty. I get my money in. That has been attraction for them. But that is pure sabotage. Right? So our businessmen should also do the right thing. Now, as individuals, when you go to the Forex Bureau, I've been to a Forex Bureau before, where the man tells me that if you don't want receipts, I can give you a higher rate. And we give them the money. He has to give you a receipt, he has to take your identity card, do a photocopy, give you a receipt, attach this receipt to it, and then it's found and returns to the central bank. But when you accept the higher rate without receipt, it sends the money to the power market. So we need to change the attitude as well. The central bank can only do so much. Law enforcement should ensure that people who are arrested for doing illegal forex trading are sent to the courts. So that they serve as a deterrent. But if you don't do that, and you go right in front of the airport police station, and these guys are sitting there, and then, I heard they even go into a police station, I mean, so we need to do something on these things. There is the extent to which the policymaker can do his bit. The central bank can only pump in a bit to stabilize the crisis, but the central bank cannot arrest law offenders and then send them to court.
Thank you. Professor Jepoma, sorry I've ignored you. The men have taken over with a lot of talk. Let me give you your time.
Since I brought this whole problem.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. Now, so I think we have started here blaming the fiscal side and the monetary side for almost every issue that has come up. And we have failed to blame ourselves as individuals and as citizens of the country. I remember, Bernard, during the COVID period, when you set the drive on rice producers, and I think you and your team at City FM made sure that we're patronizing locally manufactured rice. It did a lot of good for the country. And so as we sit and speak about inflation and exchange rate issues, I think as individuals, we should also think about what we are doing in terms of our preference for foreign goods. I think if we are trying to be patriotic and trying to resolve our national issues, then we should also try as much as possible to prefer our own goods so that we can be competitive and we can also support our local farmers to expand productivity. That will drive inflation down and resolve some of our exchange rate issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. A final comment, Joe?
I would actually like to throw out a challenge, right? And I've heard over and over again this issue about speculation and this issue about the parallel market. One thing I haven't seen is clearly how much of the total forex requirements are controlled by the informal market. It is important because, again, we may be attacking a bogeyman that does not exist. And the reason why I'm saying this is, it's one of my, I always ask myself, take the energy sector, right? They take $400 million a month, dollars. How much truly of that is controlled by the man in front of the airport police station? And because I don't have the figures, sometimes it's hard to make an argument that let's be careful and let's look at the real drivers of the issue. Again, if our trade surplus is positive, then I'm patriotic enough. And the issue should be not necessarily making me even more patriotic, but making me more, not just patriotic in terms of my desire, but making all of us patriotic in terms of retaining a little bit more of this economy than we have. We just talked about the banks. Because the banks are dominated by the foreign banks, when they make profits, we're even worried because the profits go out. And we should be talking, I was talking in Tree to a group, and a lady made a comment that was so interesting. I was talking about ownership of our resources. And she says, and I will say this in Tree before I'll translate. She says, Uncle Joe, say your way in ebunani ebusa. The day Tina gold Naganya Nisa, Naye Assassin. And what immediately struck me was he's talking about production share. He's talking about production share, and he's saying that her grandfathers used to do production share on the land for farming. And why are we not doing the same thing? Ebusa is just you tear the production into 2 or to 3, and the owner of the land takes 1/3 and goes to sell himself. In our case, for the dollars we need. So, first of all, I would like to see that statistic, how much of this market is really controlled by and then also, let's own this country.
Wonderful. Put your hands together for the panel. So, I want to bring programs. So usually when we finish such a program, there's a communique issue or something like that, but I think there's too many things said. So what I want to appeal to the keynote speaker is to just give us some closing comments. Right? We've had 3 panels. We've gone back and forth, argued, shouted. But you set the scene for